poke salad and carry it home on a poke salad. Poke salad.
What's up, guys? Welcome to this video here on Elvis is the Man, and the review that you've all been waiting for, asking me about, is finally here. Now, this is such a detailed book that I wouldn't really be doing it justice if I just started, and just did the whole book in one little video. So I want to break it up and, really break it down and do it in 3 parts. So here's the first part. So what this book really talks about, and what I like about it so much, I disagree with some things, but I'll get to that. What I really enjoy is, like, whether you disagree with her hypothesis or not regarding Elvis's death, you can't deny that this book goes into great detail on Elvis's history, okay? Some of you read it, some of you hadn't. So it really talks about Elvis's history, what it was like growing up in the South, his genealogy. Any Elvis fan would really enjoy reading this part of it. It's very detailed. It talks about his great-grandparents. She obviously did incredible research. She has interviews from Elvis's cousins, Elvis's teachers in high school, elementary, what the great-grandparents' names were, what they did for a job, what their personalities were like. I don't know how you would get that, really. Talks about, who they were. Just incredible. Now, some of the interesting details that she'll explain is how Vernon's side and Gladys's side both got into poverty, how they were so impoverished, because she says that their descendants came into land through being in wars, American wars, and that they ended up losing these properties, and these properties brought them wealth and, an asset that was an appreciating asset. They lost it because, the men just, went from wife to wife. They would have kids on this land and build a home, and then after a while they would, think the grass is greener and go with another woman and leave their kids there, their wives there, and they would lose the land because the wife and the kids, they can't pay the bills, so they would lose the land and become renters or sharecroppers, and they would just end up in poverty, and the cycle continued. It also talked about what was life like in the South, and it really seems like a really fun time to be alive. From the late 1800s and early 1900s, 20th century, talks about the poverty in the South and what it was like living in the South. It's very detailed. Talks about the farming, the school systems. There was no electricity in the South, especially the impoverished. And it talks about the sense of community that there was. If you didn't have anything, if you were suffering in some way, your neighbor would come help you, and you guys would all meet each other's needs as a community, which seemed like a nice, pleasant place.
Let's all let a quick little die. Let's give it just one more try with that feeling, that old feeling. Feel it. Are you lonesome
So that was just a little edit from my Instagram. I really like talking about Elvis stories and Elvis happenings and reviews and stuff like that, but I really still want this channel to be showing how Elvis is the greatest entertainer ever. And so I think in some of these little videos, I'm going to just put some edits in there, just wow, Elvis is freaking awesome. And so that was from my Elvis is the Man Instagram. Check it out if you got Instagram, okay? Also Facebook, I have Elvis is the Man. Anyway, back to it. That was just a little snippet. All right, so this is where it starts to get to where I'm sort of what the heck? This is where she starts to get into the genetics of it, it's not Elvis's fault. He's a product of bad genetics. Now, what happened was, this is where it really breaks down. And she says that Gladys's mom and dad were first cousins. So since they were first cousins, they were susceptible to genetic defects. And she says that's what Elvis had, defects stemming from this issue, and also Gladys did. She talks about how Gladys's had 9 brothers and sisters, and like the brothers died in their 40s. One of the sisters had like a mental issue. She says that according to Elvis's autopsy report, which I've read, I haven't noticed this, but she says that Elvis was a carrier for a genetic disorder, which is alpha-1 deficiency. Now, if I understand this correctly, alpha-1 deficiency is the proteins that are made in the liver. They're released and they are brought up to the lungs, and it protects the lungs from toxins. Okay, if you have this deficiency, the proteins are stuck in the liver and don't make it to the lungs and leaves your lungs susceptible to toxins. Now, if you have the full-blown deficiency, the proteins are trapped in the liver and eventually cause cirrhosis of the liver. Now, she says since Gladys died in the 1950s, 1958, that science wasn't up on this yet, so they misdiagnosed it hepatitis. And she says also that Elvis's grandmother, which I didn't know about, whose name was Doll, was bedridden for like 30 years because they thought she had tuberculosis. But she says it was really this alpha-1 deficiency, and this is what caused a strain of problems in the family. Now, these are some of the things that I just don't agree with. Like, she'll take information that is fact and create a hypothesis and a theory that I don't necessarily agree in. Like she says, she talks about Elvis as a child, how, and this is the first third of the book. She talks about how Elvis, would always like shake his legs and tap, and he would have insomnia. Well, she says that Elvis actually suffered from ADHD, and that it was like a physical problem. That's describes some of his personality traits and not just how he was born. That's just how he was. She's like, no, it was actually some type of disorder that made him tap. She talks about how Boston's Children's Hospital talks about if a child has ADHD, it won't be able to sleep at night. And that was actually the reason for Elvis's insomnia, that he had ADHD. And I guess in today's day and age, you would put that type of person on some type of medication. He just kept fidgeting, and it seems somewhat probable, but you don't know Elvis had ADHD. And so why are you going to say that he probably suffered from that? I mean, this may be a reasonable hypothesis, but you can't, like, she'll take things like how Elvis, like I was saying, in the 50s, he'd be in the car all the time and they'd have to sleep, but Scotty and the others wouldn't be able to sleep, and he would also travel with his cousin Gene. They wouldn't be able to sleep in the car because Elvis would be fidgeting, always wanted to talk. And it's like, this isn't his personality, who he is. It's because of a genetic, problem. Well, maybe not the genetic problem, but it's stemming from Gladys's grandparents being first cousins. Elvis had ADHD. He had asthma so severely that he would actually take his shirt off and itch his back against a tree, which she says probably wasn't the asthma, but it was a food-related allergy. But she was talking about Elvis having asthma and this ADHD, and it's like, well, what, did he dance so much and was so active on stage because of his attention deficit disorder? Another point that I'll bring up before I close this video is that she tries to debunk the thought that Elvis's mom, Gladys, was super protective and wouldn't let Elvis out of her sight and was always by him. Gladys was pretty much just like all the other moms, let Elvis go down to the movies by himself when he was 13, would let him cross the street, and she gives people like Elvis's elementary teacher saying, oh, I never saw Gladys cross the street with Elvis, and that one of her friends would also verify that she was just a normal mother, somewhat protective, but not overly, which we've always believed that she was. So anyway, it just gives a lot of points here that I don't necessarily agree with. So basically, I just see her taking facts, which I do enjoy. She does a great job, and she's done her research on the genealogy of Elvis, how he grew up, his great-grandparents, their names, some photos of them, really getting you in the Southern life and what it was like growing up poor and the things Elvis experienced and how he went through different type of housing that Elvis had to be in because of his poverty, and how they really moved just about every year throughout Elvis's childhood until he was about 15, 16. So I really enjoy it. I just don't agree with her conclusions that she's coming to. So this is basically the gist of the first 4 chapters. I do an in-depth, about 15 to 20 minute video on Patreon, talking really in depth about what each chapter is talking about. So yeah, I have to leave a few things out. Just because this video would be like an hour long if I really were to do it right. But I hope you've enjoyed this summary of the first 4 chapters. Stay tuned for the next 4, and then the 4 after that for the final conclusion, the full review. I hope you've enjoyed it. Stay tuned for more videos. If you like this video, click the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll talk to you next time.